Hello everyone and welcome back to another instalment of the Warwick F1 show. The 2025 season has now kicked off in dramatic fashion after a rain-soaked race in Melbourne, which saw Norris just win by the skin of his teeth. There was an early mistake by both McLaren drivers, meaning that Norris was just ahead of his old rival from last season, Max Verstappen, by less than a second. However, Norris was able to fend off the Dutchman to claim his first victory, the first victory of the season. Meanwhile, this was not the same luck for his teammate Oscar Piastri, where the Australia curse continues to bug him, meaning that he was only able to recover to 9th place. It was also not a good day for our rookies. Hadjar, Doohan, Bortoleto and Lawson all crashing out in the race, succumbing to what was ultimately the tough conditions in the rain. The only exceptions being Oliver Bearman, who finished plumb dead last for the Haas, and then also Kimi Antonelli, who finished a very respectable P4 for the Mercedes. It was also a day to forget for the Scuderia Ferrari, a miscalculation in their tyre strategy, meaning that both drivers were out of the points after one of the many safety cars came out, meaning that by the end of the race, they were only able to finish in P8 and P10 respectively. Certainly not how Ferrari would have liked to kick off this season in their title challenge to McLaren. We shall be talking about all of this and more on today's episode. I'm your host, Callum J. Hodge, and once again, we are joined by Katch. We are joined by our new content creation officer, Anwar, and also we're joined by a new guest for today's episode, Lucy. Thank you very much all for joining me today. We're going to first go through the summarize the episode and getting your rankings for each from each of you of this race. Anwar, we'll come to you first. Surely this has got to be up there as in the high scoring for an out of 10 race. I mean, certainly it kept me awake for the 4 a.m. tiredness, which I'm sure was plaguing us all when watching this. What did you give this?
For a season opener, it was pretty good. I felt that it kind of delivered on some of the things that we were looking for. The wet race did bring some chaos too. What I will say is the reason it probably wasn't a 10 out of 10 is because there was a period of that race of about 20 to 30 laps, which was basically pure boredom, which will be the reason why I mark it down slightly, but it still was a pretty damn good start to the season.
Yeah, certainly. I think there was a slightly a slight bit to take the race to get going a bit. Certainly when the really heavy rainfall came down, that's when everything just became chaotic. Anwar, what was actually your rating out of 10? Sorry.
Oh, I didn't say it. I will probably give it a 8 out of 10.
Interesting. Katch, what about you? What did you think of that race?
So in that period of boredom, I actually went back to sleep. So
you told us about this afterwards.
It was
indicating that there was a period of boredom. Yes,
there was. It was kind of just procession, and then I was asleep by the time Alonso crashed and the chaos occurred. So I've watched it all on repeat, so it's fine. But 8 seems so low. I'm gonna go. Okay, can we go points? Because I want to go like an 8.75. Like it's above an 8.5.
Yeah, don't. Please don't.
Okay, an 8.5. An 8.5 seems like
I take a 0.5. Yeah.
No, okay. So if we're only going on 0.5,
I'm going to go 3 decimal places.
Okay, so if we're only doing to the 0.5, I'm going in on a 9 because at 8.5, I can see myself rating other races at 8.5. So this deserves better because of the chaos. The amount of times during that race, I was just like, what is happening? How is this person here? Who's doing this? Like, I don't understand what was going on for most of it, for that second part, and that makes it great. So we're going with a 9, I guess.
It was certainly continually difficult to predict what the order was going to be. So I think a 9 maybe is deserving for what was ultimately an incredible season opener. Lucy, are you along the same lines of Anwar and Katch? What did you think of that race?
Yeah, I also thought the race was really interesting. I definitely think that the rain coming down, I think it's starting off being a really wet race and then it kind of dried out again. And then, like you said, like everyone said already, just the absolute, like it just chucked it down for about 2 laps. Definitely made it a lot more interesting. Also switched up the order, which I love. I'm going to rate it actually an 8.5 because I agree there was that little bit of boredom in kind of the middle. Where it was kind of slightly less interesting. And I also think like it was really interesting, but in a way for a season opener, I maybe would have liked. I didn't feel like, because it was a wet race, I maybe got I didn't get that good of a gauge of how all the cars were actually performing, and so I kind of knocked it down from a 9 to an 8.5 because I'd like to. I don't know. I'd have liked something maybe a bit more representative of how the rest of the season might be going to go.
That is a good point, because with the running order, I don't know whether we'll go through the running order, but it was, some of those cars really shouldn't be in those positions. But I think you mentioned about the rain. It wasn't even just the rain coming down during the race. Beforehand, there was so much race that the F2 feature race, they tried to get going, then they red flagged it. And then they tried to get going again, and they cancelled it. Like, they completely cancelled the race because of the rain. And this was only 2.5 hours before the F1 was due to start. So it was even like up in the air of when the F1 would actually start on time. So even before the F1 started, the rain was causing chaos. So I think, it was just mad in that sense.
I'm certainly glad that it didn't start any earlier, because I was set my alarm for 3:59 a.m. and not a moment before, because I was wanting to get maximum sleep to try and get through this. We actually don't, unfortunately, have Chime here, who usually does his running order, so I am going to do that now. So first place was Lando Norris, very close behind us, and the second behind was Max Verstappen. George Russell leading the two Mercedes in P3, rounding out that final place on the podium. Antonelli later after the race reinstated in P4 after the penalty. After a 5-second penalty was later removed from him after it was claimed that he ran into Nico Hülkenberg in the pit lane and had an unsafe release. This was later taken away by the stewards. That means Albon finishes in P5, Stroll in P6, Hülkenberg in P7, exceeding all of the points tally that Sauber had last year in the single race. Very impressive performance from him. Then we've got the first of the Ferraris in P8, Charles Leclerc, Piastri in 9th, and Hamilton in 10th, rounding out the top 10. We then have Gasly shortly missing out on the points in P11, Tsunoda in P12, and then the two Hasses in 13th and 14th, with Ocon leading the two of those. And then we have our 6 DNF drivers, quite a lot succumbing to the tough conditions. We have Lawson, Bortoletto, Alonso, Sainz, Doohan, and Hadjar. So we'll start off, I think, with our discussion with ultimately, I think, who was one of, if not the most consistent driver in which was a very inconsistent and unpredictable race, which is Lando Norris. And Katch, we're going to have to come to you first, being our own McLaren fan on the podcast here. I know you mentioned, and it wasn't very comfortable when he did make that mistake, when both the McLarens made that mistake, but I think Lando Norris really did a superb job. And ultimately, despite that mistake, when the chips were down, when it really mattered in those final couple of laps, when Verstappen was right on his tail, he put in some really awesome laps to ultimately get the win. And it's exactly what I think he needed for a season where we know he's going to be challenging for the driver's title.
100%. I think he's done so much work over the winter, and it shows about how decisive he now is, how dominant he is. It wasn't even just at the end where he was holding up Max. He had to survive 2 safety car restarts. And survive is the wrong word, because he led those safety car restarts. He kept Max behind. He did his timings well. Even like in the first lap, Max was coming at them, but he was able to hold on there. So I think the improvement that's been done over the winter regarding safety car restarts, incredible. Also, tyre strategy. So many teams and drivers, it is, as you referenced, reminiscent of Sochi 2021, and it did give me a lot of PTSD when I saw those both McLarens go off. I thought it was actually game over. I was about to cry. But he was able, I don't know how, by God's miracle, Red Bull messed up. We love that. And to be honest, they went on to the Inters. And then I saw some radio messages that Will Joseph, his race engineer, the McLaren pit wall, was saying, we think we might go back onto slicks. And Lando was like, no, I'm not going on slicks. And Will was like, do you want to consider it? Lando was like, no, put those tyres away. He knew what tyres he wanted to be on. He knew his strategy. And it showed. And he was able to dominate on track as well as strategy-wise. So this is definitely a season for him to come into fruition.
Certainly was a very rare couple of mistakes, not only from Red Bull, but also I think this is the first time I've seen in probably the space of about 2 years that I've seen Verstappen actually make an error on track. And ultimately, that's why Piastri was able to get ahead of him initially. Lucy, there was a quite, I remember, a bit a team radio message that was sent to Lando Norris in those final few stages that said that he thought that Norris had the pace in the car already, and if he just drove the car well, then he was able to fend off Verstappen. Do you think that this performance should be more attributed to Lando Norris himself, or do you really think that McLaren had such, because of their performance in the car and how that was ahead of Red Bull and Mercedes and Ferrari, that Lando Norris was able to get the win today?
I mean, I think like there's no question that McLaren is a very good and very well-rounded car, but I think that when it's a wet race, it kind of does override some of the sort of the natural advantage that a car might have, and it becomes a lot more about the driver's skill. Like when Katch was talking through it, I was thinking that Norris's performance was very dominant. Like he led most of the race, apart from obviously pit stops and things like that. But it wasn't an easy win. Like he still had to navigate the conditions well. He was under pressure from Verstappen at the end of basically every time the race restarted. He performed very strongly, but it was by no means he had a good car and could just drive away from everyone else because of it. There was definitely a lot of skill in there as well, as opposed to just a car that was sort of a rocket ship.
And I think as well, I think you'd probably agree with me here that when it's the rain, it completely levels everything out, and so you are going, and that's all. I think ultimately why Verstappen was able to get so high up was because even if the Red Bull car wasn't that great, because of the wet conditions, we know how good he is in the wet conditions. Thinking Brazil last year, where he was able to pull off an amazing drive from 17th to first place, and so I think that's should give some more tribute to Lando Norris with how he was able to perform in the wet conditions when his car wasn't as dominant.
Oh yeah, I mean, they do always say in like F1 that like the rain is, the great leveler between the cars. Like, I mean, there was a Sauber in P7 at the end of the race. I mean, that should probably tell us something. So yeah, I definitely think at that point it's like really anyone kind of who performs in those conditions, it is the driver performing well. I mean, especially when there's 6 DNFs, like driver performance is obviously going to play a massive part in however the results turn out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And luckily that Norris was able to recover from that mistake that he made about midway through the race. However, one driver that wasn't able to do so was his teammate, who also made a very similar mistake, in fact, at the same time, at the same corner, which meant that he unfortunately dropped down right to the back of the grid, and luckily was able to, because of some tyre strategy, because of what other teams were doing, they were able to get the points in the end. He was able to finish P9. Anwar, this is obviously quite a key mistake, I think, from Piastri, and one that was ultimately blew a 1-2. They were sitting very comfortably. Can we expect this at other points in the season for Piastri, or do we think this is maybe just a small blip, and then when we get to China next weekend, we can really expect Piastri to stay up there with Lando Norris to challenge for 1-2?
I think this is one where we've got to wait and see. And the reason is because last season, although they had the best car, I don't think there was any pressure on Piastri as like a title contender. And he's walking into this season as one of them, whether he likes it or not. And so by virtue of having this McLaren and having the pressure of, okay, you should be challenging here, this is something where he has to deal with. So we don't and I don't think we've seen him experience this type of pressure before. He's very laid back as an individual, so I think a lot of people will be inclined to say, okay, he should be able to deal with this okay, and this should be just a blip, but we don't know for certain. It's going to be something that we've got to see over the first few races just to see if this is like a sustained problem for him or not, because whether Katch wants to acknowledge it or not, Norris had that problem last year when he was...
he did. I do agree.
So I think although he might have this laid-back persona, that still doesn't mean he doesn't feel the pressure.
100%. I think both McLaren drivers feel that pressure. Norris did make mistakes last year. Like, as much as like he is my favorite driver, I will be the first to admit like he was not perfect. There was nowhere near perfect. With regards to Piastri, I don't know whether the sentiment you guys were trying to get at was that it was driver error. I completely disagree. I think it was not even Max Verstappen in that race that could have saved that. It was just unlucky that at that corner, the rain came down, both McLaren drivers got hit on different parts of the track. I don't know anyone that could have recovered from that. It was literally just aquaplaning off. You can't help it. So I completely disagree. I think it was just so unlucky from Piastri. And then it was raw talent to be able to get that car going again. It took him about a minute, but he was able to get it going out of the grass and carry on. So we should not be blaming Piastri under any circumstances, in my opinion.
So you think it's maybe the team to blame?
No, it's no one to blame. It's the rain. It's just unlucky. It just rained and both drivers went off.
I see. Fair enough.
I feel like Lucy, what are you about to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think it's probably more impressive that in those conditions, in like very soggy grass, he managed to get the car going again. Because really kind of like once he had that little blip in like the first bit of that chicane where he then spun out, like there was no way he was going to be able to save it kind of going into the next grassy bit. I think, yeah, at the end of the day, it's just the rain and also the inherent curse of being an Australian driver at the Australian Grand Prix.
Well, there's true. We did actually. I was wondering throughout the race, is the Australian curse going to be broken? If for anyone who doesn't know, there has never been an Australian driver that has been even on the podium at a home race. The two drivers hoping to break that curse being Oscar Piastri a bit more realistically, and also Jack Doohan in maybe exceptional circumstances. However, he crashed out early on in the race, meaning he did not finish. But yes, I suppose we're going to have to maybe wait for another year to break that Australian curse. But for now, it will remain intact. Certainly, very challenging conditions for all of the drivers, and that is definitely one of the reasons why we saw so many people going off, even the best like Norris and Piastri. However, I do want to move on to a team that we should pay a lot of tribute to, which I think is Mercedes, and this comes on to the fact that I think what I would say for a lot of drivers is that there's some drivers that we probably didn't pay much attention to, but I think in a race like this, if we don't pay much attention to drivers, it means that they've had a good race because they haven't spun out, they haven't crashed, they haven't had a mistake somewhere on the circuit. And especially for Kimi Antonelli, I don't think, Lucy, I wanted to get your thoughts on this because we haven't actually got your thoughts yet on the podcast about the rookies coming in, especially Kimi Antonelli. I did not think that Kimi Antonelli was going to do well when coming into Mercedes. I thought he was too inexperienced, and giving him this much of a jump up to a seat of this caliber that we know can perform at the front from F2 was going to be too much for him. But he has come through that with flying colours, and this is going to be a huge relief of pressure, I think, for him. Being able to finish P4, just one place behind his teammate, that's a huge result for him, surely.
Oh my gosh, definitely. I mean, I too kind of before he started was thinking that, you know, I did wonder whether the pressure was going to be too much. I didn't think he was going to, flounder, but I definitely thought it would take, at least half of the season before we were going to kind of see him start to kind of be anywhere near kind of Russell on the track. I mean, like in the rain, I mean, he like when in F2 and things like that, his best performances have tended to be in the rain. So in that sense, it's maybe not that surprising. But I mean, considering your first race in an F1 car, in a race like that, I mean, to even make for him and Behrman as well, to even make it to the end of the race is amazing. And then to also not only that, but to end up in like P4, like making overtakes as well. That's not just a P4 from other people messing up pit strategies or people DNFing. He did some cracking overtakes. So I think that's genuinely, I didn't expect it, but it was amazing.
I would put it down to one of the all-time great performances, I think, especially for a driver of his lack of experience in an F1 car. We already mentioned that the rookies such as Hajar, Doohan, Bortoleto and Lawson all eventually succumbed to the tough conditions, but it just didn't happen for Antonelli.
Can I just check, did you just say, in reference to your phrase, and I quote, all-time great performances, in what context? We're not chucking this on like the best performances of F1 of all time. I'm sorry.
I think so. I mean, think of how crazy. Think of how, yeah, but think of his.
This is where we draw a line. Surely, come on.
Like, you can't say a rookie drive. Sure, it was really good to get to P4. We're not putting it on par
Okay,
with
fine.
like
One of the all-time great rookie drives. Then I think.
There we
because
are.
come on, it's his
Yeah, there
first
we
time
are, there
in
we are.
F1.
There we are.
It's his first time in F1 in an F1 car racing. It's a completely unpredictable race. He wasn't even doing that well in F. Like it was quite unpredictable, and he wasn't even like beating everyone in F2. And he's come and put it on P4. I think. I don't know. I think
Okay,
that's really
I
something
understand.
to be applauded.
He has been in F1 cars before. He's done a lot of testing in Mercedes, just not in their modern cars.
Okay, fine,
He
not a
did
proper
free
race
practice
then, sorry.
sessions. Yeah, he did free prep sessions, but yeah, okay. One of the best rookie performances we've ever seen. Go for it. All-time performances, go watch your history. There's no way. I can't agree with that.
Okay, maybe we'll limit it to rookie performances then. But yeah, I still really want
He
to
did do great.
give a lot of. I still want to give a lot of credit for to Antonelli for what I think was such an impressive performance from him and such a mature drive as well. And we should also give a lot of credit for George Russell, who did very well as well in that second Mercedes, able to get the podium for Mercedes, and something that I don't think many of us really expected, because one team that we thought was going to be up there ultimately was Ferrari, and they weren't. They finished in 8th and 10th, with McLaren 8th and Hamilton in 10th. And both drivers, I think, did seem to be struggling quite a bit throughout the race. Lucy, do you think this is down to the car performance, or just unlucky with the conditions, or maybe some error in strategy? What do you put this poor performance down to?
I mean, I'd say basically a combination of the things that you've just said, which I realise is a bit of a cop-out answer, but it is true. I mean, definitely, if you'd told me before this weekend that the Constructors' Championship coming out of the first round would be a tie, and it was going to be between McLaren and Mercedes, I probably would have laughed at you, or at least expected that it would be Ferrari who were tied with McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. I think that yesterday in the dry quali, it maybe showed that just the raw pace of the Ferrari, at least around this circuit, isn't as strong as they'd hoped for. You know, they qualified, I think, 7th and 8th, or maybe 8th and 9th. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I think today they made some strategy errors. I mean, what on earth were they doing with that tyre change? They sort of tried to weigh up their odds and ended up just going for the two worst options they could have gone for. And that kind of put them on the back foot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the... Yeah, I think you mentioned the tyre change. I think there was maybe the tyre change they did at the end. Maybe made slight... So they had to take risks, I think, at that point when they were down the grid and just try something. But I think, yeah, there were a lot of mistakes that were made in the race that definitely made things worse than they were. Get your screenshots ready, everyone, because Kik Sauber is currently ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship, with Kik Sauber on 6 points and Ferrari on 5 points, which I hope is not something that persists throughout the season. Anwar, do we think that... We obviously mentioned a lot of errors in the race, but is there any element of either driver or car lack of performance? Is this something that we can expect to see in races to come, or can this just be put down to a fluke of a performance, maybe with the tough conditions?
All the discussion from testing was that the Ferraris were on par, or at least close to being on par with the McLarens, and that's just not materialised at all. As soon as we went into quali, it just looked like this car was a lot slower. I think there's genuine lack of pace. They were struggling to... I think Hamilton was behind Albon for a long period of time in that race. And even... I think that's where I'd put a little bit more of the blame towards. I think they were just genuinely uncompetitive at the track and with the weather conditions at the time. So I hope for their sake, they get it together for China, because otherwise, for all the promise that they showed, for them not to deliver on it at all would be pretty frustrating if you're for everyone involved, I reckon. Even if you're not a Ferrari fan, I think we wanted a little bit more of a title battle, and this isn't looking at this current moment as they don't look like a team who can provide that challenge. What I will say is I am going to disagree with the whole sentiment about strategy, because Ferrari don't come to race to finish 5th and 6th. So if they have an opportunity to take a gamble, and for it to potentially pay off in the way it could have, I don't blame them for taking it with both cars. I also don't think swapping back to the inters is as bad of a decision as I thought, because as soon as we went back to full racing conditions under the green flag, we saw that, particularly after the between sector 2 and sector 3, there was a lot of water on the track, and so you could see the coattails behind the cars as they accelerated. So I don't think them sticking on the slicks would have been a good idea at all, even though it was worth the gamble. I don't think that was the thing that lost them the race. If they stuck it on the slicks, they would have fallen through the pack so quickly compared to the Inter runners.
So what you're saying is you want to attribute this maybe more to the actual performance of the car, or just some early mistakes?
Probably performance of the car, because the driver lineup they have the caliber to not make mistakes. At least at least one of them not making a large amount of mistakes. In Truth, I don't think there was a hell of a lot of mistakes out the two of them. I think Lewis particularly was just a little bit slow. I know Leclerc had a spin, but even then he was still within the fighting pack. So I think it was genuine uncompetitiveness from their end that I'd attribute more of this poor performance towards.
Katch, do you think that, as Anwar was saying, that maybe that there isn't as much of a title battle as we thought between McLaren and Ferrari, and that it's maybe slightly naive to assume that Ferrari can get things together to mount some sort of a title charge on McLaren, or either on the drivers or the constructors? Because I mean, McLaren looked really strong, apart from that small mistake with Piastri, which, as he said in his interview, was just a quarter of a lap mistake, and might have not even, as we mentioned, been a mistake. Might have just been unlucky with how the track conditions turned out to be at that moment when they reached that corner. And apart from that, they look so impressive. So is it maybe a bit naive to assume that Ferrari will be able to mount a serious title challenge unless they improve severely with their car?
No, I don't want to make any assumptions, because if we're going on that logic, we're assuming Kick Sauber's going to be in a proper midfield battle. So if we're taking anything from this race,
I wouldn't say a midfield battle. I'm talking about the fighting with McLaren. Obviously, it was a very good performance from Hülkenberg to get up to 7th.
But the point I'm making is that if we're trying to take the assumption that because of this performance and because of Ferrari's quote-unquote lack on pace, they're not going to be able to fight McLaren. Like, I'm just comparing.
It's more us attributing the significant amount of pace that McLaren have, though.
Okay, yeah, that
isn't an easy jump to make.
McLaren have like a proper car. Like they've done the work.
Yeah, the point that we're saying though is the fact that the McLaren looked imperious today. In that stint after the Verstappen tyres fell off a cliff, they looked so much quicker than everyone else. I think they were at a point nearly 2 pit stops ahead of Hamilton. That's not a track specific thing. That's pace. So I think there needs to be jumps in that car. Yeah, the Ferrari might be the second quickest car, but that's still considerably off where we think the McLaren is. And I think everything that we saw from this weekend, 4 tenths quicker on a single lap, and then at least that in race trim. Whether we like it or not, I don't think that is a car that will consistently fight with the McLaren at its current iteration. Maybe with upgrades, it probably will change with upgrades, but I think we need to start. Again, it's a lot of conclusions to draw from one race, but I think the extent of the gap means that we can make some of these more sweeping assumptions a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, okay. I do disagree with you there. I understand that, but maybe I'm in a minority. I was going to say, like, McLaren are significantly ahead of the pack, and that is completely the case, but I don't want to judge Ferrari. I think, sure, they didn't have much pace, but it was obvious that they had setup issues, and it's so hard to create, like, a good setup when you know that the rain is coming in the first two on the race day, and the first 2 days are dry. I still think that Ferrari have pace. Sure, they're not going to be able to fight McLaren like every other race. I'll agree that bit's different, but I think they're easily going to be the second quickest car, in my opinion, like without a doubt. And I think I'm not doing any predictions for China, but my prediction is still a Ferrari win for China. That's crazy, sure, but I don't trust that they've fallen off. I don't believe that at all. So, yeah, I'm in the minority with that assumption, but I just think that the pecking order's McLaren right at the top, Ferrari right in second, and then it's close. But yeah, I'm not making any judgments from Australia because this race was just chaos. I don't.
This is the problem.
Apart from McLaren, no one else's pace has been shown. No one else's.
Even
even
Mercedes.
Yeah, even Mercedes. I don't know where they are. This could have just been a lucky race. It's a first race of a season. It's a good strategy from them. I really doubt that we've seen the pace of them. I don't think we have. I don't think we've seen the pace of anyone apart from McLaren, is my point. So I'm still feeling their season, pre-season in mind.
It's the problem with a wet race as the first race of the season. You can't really gauge the true pace of the car, and it will probably have to wait until China, which we'll be able to see that, I suppose. And just another car that I wanted to mention, which did struggle quite a bit, was Haas. Now, I think Haas is one of the teams that we didn't quite know where they were exactly in testing compared to the other teams, because we knew that, yes, they were at the back, but they were doing a lot of high fuel runs. They had some probably different focuses compared to some of the other teams, or what we kind of expect the teams to have on different days. But they were completely near the back throughout the entire weekend, really. And yes, they did finish the race, and so just by finishing the race, they did come close to the points, but they didn't seem competitive with anyone, I didn't think. Even the Saubers at some point. So, Lucy, if I come to you first, like, do you think that this is a serious concern for Haas, that they were ultimately challenging for 6th last season, and now this is where they've ended up in the first race, not from a lack of luck or fortune or just some kind of freak event and crashing out, just the fact that they were back here and this is the pace they showed, at least in the wet conditions. Yeah, this is the pace they've got compared to the other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, if I were Haas, I'd probably be concerned after that performance. We didn't think they were going to be pretty good, but I thought we'd, at least maybe get some nice battles for 17th to 20th between them and Sauber. But, I think this race has really kind of shown us the true pace of actually two teams, which are McLaren being very fast and Haas being the opposite of that. I think, I don't know, because I think with it being maybe the last year of the regulations, they've decided, maybe like what they did in 2021, to just put all of their effort into next year's car. And so who knows, maybe we'll come next year and Haas will be, permanently up in like 5th and 6th or something like that. But yeah, for the rest of this season, I think that they may end up being what the Saubers were last season, where we're just waiting to see if we can ever have 10 cars DNS so they can get a point.
So I suppose that makes sense if they're going to focus a lot of efforts on the 26 cars. And I think you can expect a lot of those midfield teams to do that. But I at least thought they would be, I suppose, somewhere around about where they were last year. And 5th and 6th, I'd say, is definitely a good spot for them to aim for, given how good they were last year and how consistent they were last year. I suppose even though they did, in the end, only come 7th, it was, I think, still slightly a freak event of Alpine getting 3rd in. Oh yeah,
I basically count that Haas came 6th last year. While technically Alpine may have come 6th, in my mind they came 9th.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They did. I think they did definitely deserve 6th. In the end, Alpine and specifically Gasly, to have some very good performances. I think they still were very deserving of getting higher. Anwar, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. Do you think that Haas, maybe they are looking to finish as low down as 9th or 10th, because ultimately I think they are in a very sticky situation with the performance they have in the car as well, because they're a team, as we mentioned, probably do want to focus quite a bit on 2026 and the big regulation changes and the chances that brings them in moving up the grid. And so they're now in a situation where they're almost just having to sacrifice 2025. Is that, do you think, going to be the case?
I hope so. I hope for their sake it is, because if they have worked on this car to be this much slower than the rest, it's a massive concern. If maybe it's them trying to get more wind tunnel time, because it could be that. But at the same time, I don't think that's worth risking all the prize money. So I don't really know if this is a tactical thing from them. I was on the Haas hype train by saying they're both going to be in the points because of their performance testing last year mirrored a lot of what they did this year, and I thought they were on the same path. But clearly, they were just trying to hide the fact that they were so much further back compared to everyone else. They weren't competitive in any session. I even think the one thing they did right, they ended up reversing in strategy. So there was quite a lot that went wrong for them.
I think a lot of us were on the Haas hype train. Ultimately, I certainly was, and I expected them to do quite well this year, especially with the new line that they had. Behrman, we know, was a strong rookie, and Ocon, who's got quite a bit of experience. But yeah, as you mentioned, it just hasn't happened for them, has it?
Yeah, not at all. Even strategy wise, I think what you guys were saying that you think Ferrari did a poor strategy. I thought these guys did a worse job because they were on the Inters and they decided to scrap the Inters, and then it proceeded to start to rain it down again within 3 laps. So that was their one avenue to get points, and they didn't take it. So a lot of things to look for through the data for the engineers to go through, but it's pretty not exactly their best weekend, to put it that way.
But do you think you mentioned about the strategy as well? Do you think that's maybe because they knew that they were just going to be stuck down in last place and they just had to try anything and just throw anything at the performances to try?
I like the fact they went on the Inters, but my point is they should have stayed on the Inters and stayed rather than converge onto the drives like everyone else did. That was their one avenue to try and do something different, and they didn't take it, even though they knew that on pace they were going to finish last regardless of what happens.
No, I do think that makes sense. I think maybe it should have been more obvious to them that the 6 was not the right tyre, and so that's definitely a decision I'd say that they'd want to overturn if they were doing it, if they were to do that race again. And of course, it wouldn't be a podcast review episode if we weren't going to talk about some of the decisions that the stewards have made. And I think the one that was mentioned that stuck out to me, especially from the commentators mentioned it, was that there was not a red flag brought out in that race. And that's not just me saying that because it was in my predictions and I did not get that. It's obviously a very serious thing to talk about with safety concerns. And even though there were multiple times that there were cars that had crashed out and DNF'd that were slightly, partially or wholly on track, and they had to bring out the vehicles to remove that, but they only did a safety car and they did not do a red flag. And so, but then also at the same time, Verstappen and Norris were interviewed about this after the race, and they seemed to think that the situation was fine, contrary to the opinions that were said by, I think, Crofty and Brundle in the race commentary. Katch, I'll come to you about this first. What do you think was the right decision? Do you think that the stewards got it right today with the calls they made, especially in the unpredictable conditions?
I'm not sure. I think, they were going very slow on the safety car. I think the controversial bit was when the recovery vehicles were back on track for Sainz and Doohan's crash, I believe. That was the main controversial bit in my view. But there was 4 safety cars. The fact that we had 4 safety cars and no red flags, I know you can't just look at stats, but to me that shows that there was chaos. Even if you don't watch the race and you just see that, there was chaos. Maybe they could have red flagged it just to kind of equalize it out a little bit. Make sure that the track is safe, all the cars are there. Sure, some of the front runners felt really comfortable going through past recovery vehicles under a slow safety car, but it was such a tight area. It was right in the middle of the track, the vehicle was. They had one slither, and if your tyre went onto the wet a tiny bit, you would have got into it. So I don't know, maybe they could have been a red flag. I think that would have been safer. I don't know whether this sets a dangerous precedent for the rest of the season that the stewards don't want to red flag under most circumstances, but I think they should have at least once.
Yeah, I do definitely think I agree with that. At least for some of the situations, as you mentioned, with Doohan, and the sense that the car was the recovery vehicle was completely on the track, and especially there were marshals as well that were pretty much standing in the middle of the track, and the safety car was redirecting them around. And we know how easy it is for like with Lawson, for example, just in his crash, just a tiny bit on the power, just a tiny bit on a slightly damper part of the track, and the car can completely get away from you. And that was just something I think that did really stick in my mind for that race. But yeah, and also as well, just before we go into predictions, I do want to give brief mentions. We haven't really spoken too much about Albon, Stroll, and Hülkenberg as well, 5th, 6th, and 7th respectively. And the reason we haven't talked about them that much is because I think they had a fairly uneventful race. But as I mentioned, apart from maybe Albon, he had a bit of fighting, I think, near the end with Antonelli. But as I mentioned, I think an uneventful race is, in this context, a good race because it means that they did not get into any of the action and chaos. So I think they all did some really good performances with some names that we're not expecting. Stroll, definitely, I think no one was expecting that of him. But to give credit where credit's due, I think he's done a really good job there, as well as Hülkenberg in a car that's not that good, and also Albon, a great recovery drive after Sainz had crashed out. But that pretty much sums up all of the talking points that I had. I think we'll now go on to reviewing our predictions, so if you didn't join us last time round, then we have a new format that we're going to be doing for our predictions this year. So we were predicting our top 5 drivers. If you get a driver in the correct place, then you get 3 points. And if you get a driver that is 1 place off, then you score 1 point for that. And then we also predict a pole position and a driver that DNFs, both of those worth 3 points each. And then a wild prediction that it can be anything that we want. And that's essentially the equivalent of our 2 or 3 point predictions last season. And instead that is worth 5 points. So, Anwar, if we go with you first, if you wanted to run through your predictions for the Australian Grand Prix, how did you get on?
Cool. So I started off the weekend by saying that George Russell would get pole, and that didn't happen. So no points there. In terms of the top 5, I put Norris first, Russell second, Verstappen third. Norris got first, so 3 points there. 1 point each for Russell and Verstappen because they were just 1 position off.
I think I'm actually impressed that you got the podium. I did not expect any one of us to get a podium. So congratulations.
No, fair place, actually.
Yeah, that's crazy.
4th and 5th weren't as good though. Piastri 4th, Leclerc 5th. So no points there. The DNF came in the form of Hadjar. That happened on the formation lap, so first one there. And my wild prediction was so far off, I might as well not say it because I said Haas double points. Did not end well.
Yeah, that was that really did not do well. But yeah, very well, especially the top 3. I think Katch and I both put Ferraris in the top 3, and obviously that did not happen.
I did say that I had not a lot of faith in Ferrari, and you guys laughed at me. So
interesting. Fair enough. No, I will state what I've said before on this podcast many times, and that's that my predictions are not good at all. Predictions are notorious, I think, on this podcast at this point. But to give credit where credit's due, that was a very, very good shout to go for. And certainly with drivers that DNF, we did have a lot of choice in that for this time around. I'll go next. So I did my pole position as Norris, and he was able to get that, and he was also able to convert that into a win, which I also predicted as well. Then I've said Leclerc second and Piastri third. Obviously, neither of those drivers appearing in the top 5. Verstappen in 4th. And then Hamilton in 5th, so I don't get any points for those drivers either, as Verstappen was 2 places off. He finished 2nd, and I said he finished 4th, and then Hamilton wasn't even in the top 5 at all. I said Bortoleto would DNF, and of course he was the kick Sauber driver that did DNF. And then my wild prediction was that there were 2 red flags during the Saturday and Sunday, and so that means, and obviously that didn't happen. We had 4 safety cars, we had no red flags, and so that means that I finish off on, 3 8. I want to say 8 points. I think 3 for Lando Norris in pole position, 3 for the Borseth that DNF'd, and then 3 points for Norris finishing in first. So that's 9 points overall. 9 points overall. Yeah, that's correct. And then finally, to give her predictions is Katch. How did you get on for your weekend?
So I also predicted Norris pole position. So that is the 3 points. I'm probably going to get the points totals wrong. I do not remember. Even though you've literally just said it, I'm still adjusting to this new system. My top 5 was pretty diabolical, to be honest, because I had faith in Ferrari, and to be honest, I still have faith in Ferrari. So at least I'm not predicting for next weekend. But I wanted Callum's prediction to be right. I just didn't have faith, so I predicted Leclerc to be first, and I am so happy to be wrong. I am so happy to be wrong that was not right. I did predict Norris in second, so thankfully that's a point. And that's where my points end. So I got Hamilton in third, Piastri in fourth, Russell in fifth. So, bit of a shame. DNF driver was also Bortoletto, so that happened. And my wild prediction was 2 cars from the same constructor DNF. And somehow we got 6 DNFs, but they were all different constructors, which I think is just a personal attack, but it's fine.
A personal attack?
Yeah, it's a bit rude. I feel like there should have been at least... They knew that I'd predicted 2 from the same constructor, and they were like, "No, we're actually going to stay on track." So, yeah.
Okay, so we'll forget about Katch's land of delusion there. So we are
explain to the FIA about it. So that this is rude.
Write an email to the stewards. How would the FIA get is one of the Mohammed bin Sulayem going to bring out some kind of rocket launcher and just fire it at one of the cars or something?
No, but we know that everyone listens to this podcast. Like, you've got the whole...
We do, to be fair. Mohammed bin Sulayem, I hope you're doing well, mate, because I know you're listening to this right now.
Exactly.
He is.
It's great. So they saw that I predicted that, and they were like, no. Not happening today.
Anyway, moving on, we will have, we're going to have, of course, a China preview coming your way very soon. As it is a double header, we're going straight into China for round 2. That's going to be great. Hopefully, we're going to be able to get a bit more of a gauge of the true pace of the cars with what can be expected to be a dry weather race. So make sure you're checking out your Spotify and YouTube pages for that. But that's all from us here in the online studio. Thank you very much, Anwar, Katch, and Lucy, for joining me. I've been your host, Callum, and until next time, goodbye.